All right. A little bit of information about the survey itself. This is our triannual FYI homeowner survey. So every 3 years since 2020, we have surveyed every eligible participant in the Front Yard Initiative program. And that means everyone who has had their installation in the ground for 6 months or more. This year, as we have sunsetted our incentive program as of the end of 2020, we were able to actually survey every participant that we've had, every eligible participant. If you account for some people who have said that they moved or that they didn't want to be surveyed again, out of our 168 homeowners in over 10 years, that's about 140 people. We received 88 responses for a 68% response rate. And this year we asked some volunteers to beta test, volunteers who had been participants to beta test our questions for us. We also changed our methodology a little bit by, instead of doing just simply questions on a Likert scale, we asked for more open-ended opinions. We included more chances for people to comment, give us their own personal feedback in their own words. And we found that that painted a really rich picture, even if it's just with a few little anecdotes here and there. So that being said, I am going to share this presentation with y'all. And once again, thanks for coming. All right, we're going to go through our key findings and our recommendations for moving forward. Seems I am not able to, there we go. All right, so our first key finding is that the residential green infrastructure technology is strong. So over 10 years, we've installed 168 installations, and the main crux of starting this survey was to see how they do over time. Are they still managing floodwater? Are they still adding aesthetic and inspiring? Is everything working the way that it's supposed to and maintaining? And according to our surveys, the answer is overwhelmingly yes. We've included two sets of graphs here, I want to note, because in 2020, we asked this question on a Likert scale of 7, and then in 2023, we switched to 5. So we have our 2020 answers on the top and our 2023 and 2026 answers on the bottom, just for ease of reading. So as you can see, most people are very happy with the functionality and the aesthetic and their overall experience, meaning that if something is properly maintained, this technology absolutely lasts, and we can depend on it for at least a decade. Our second key finding is that there is still not enough public communication about flooding and green infrastructure. We pulled out two quotes that we found really potent. One relatively younger person had said that there is so much misinformation on trees and the water table among older neighbors. More education is needed, blaming the older generation for the lack of green infrastructure. And then the other saying that young people just don't care. We know from the wide age spread of our participants that neither of these things is true. And I want to point out, these are just two quotes. These are not overwhelming opinions shared by our participants, but it points to the fact that we still are not at the point where green infrastructure is built into decision making. And this is something that we saw frustrated our participants quite a bit. And we're going to talk more about that later, but it was a point of contention that with a number of them that, for example, small nonprofits are bearing the brunt of providing information to people instead of it being top-down decisions, et cetera. I want to shout out here, because we have a couple of these folks on the call. WaterWise Gulf South is doing a fantastic job educating the general public. While they have their areas geographically that they work in, we hear rave reviews about their Green Infrastructure 101 projects, even from people who aren't eligible for the program. And I think it's time for us to be holding up the people doing that work. Finding number 3, this was sort of this made us happy. People love their plants and they want to talk about their plants. So this is a smattering of voluntary responses that people gave to any number of questions. Even when we weren't asking about plants, people wanted to talk about their plants. And what this tells us is how personally people take this, how personally they feel tied to the green infrastructure on their property because it relates to plants. People talked about plants in relationship to, or they talked about plants in relationship to the plants themselves, to their neighbors, to their homes, to their recent ancestors. Um, and, and so we know that, especially from all of this data, that making room for plants where there was concrete is good for people. And we need to be paying attention to the love that people put into their green infrastructure. We talk about all of this technology in terms of, does it, minimize flood risk, and does it decrease the urban heat island effect? And there are these metrics that we're measuring that are crucial. But we can't forget the love and the blood, sweat, and tears that people are putting into these spaces and into these other beings, these plants. This is also seen people's love for plants in the activities that they choose. You can see here that after FYI participation in these other organizations and these other activities jumps. So especially for the Native Plants Initiative and volunteering to plant trees, these activities just jump. People want to keep participating. People want to keep learning, and they want to keep making sure that plants get in the ground and that it's native plants that belong here. Not solely, of course. We have people join the Herb Society of America, local gardening groups that are not focusing solely on natives. The plant love goes way across the board. Key finding number 4, residential green infrastructure improves quality of life. So we have a question here where we ask folks to just check off on a given list represented in the graph, which benefits of green infrastructure they see. So this year, we also left open some space for bringing in your own answer. So on our given list, our presented list, we know that people are seeing the benefit of spending more time outdoors, of having increased pollinators and seeing other wildlife. Localized flooding is obviously one of the most popular benefits that folks see. But it's even or even less than the time that they spend outside and their relationship to the environment. We even have a few who have reported lower utility bills and fewer mosquitoes. This year, we were absolutely delighted by the responses that people wrote in, including happiness, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. And daily, I revel in having it. People also said that their mold is mitigated, which I think is important to note, that conservation is being, or that topsoil is being conserved. And we know from anecdotal evidence that people include gathering spaces on their properties where none existed before, both in the FYI program and outside of it, that we're creating spaces for people to relax and enjoy each other's company outdoors where none existed when it was just concrete. Another thing that we learned that is, I think, really worth paying some attention to is that hardscape is both popular and necessary. We've been talking about plants, we've been talking about wild spaces, gathering spaces, but let's be honest, we are in a city. People need driveways, people need sidewalks, people need walkways, especially when it comes to places to put vehicles and accessibility for all of us. And so outside of just having, native plants and shrubs really upticking in 2020 there, you can see that for at least our 2026 survey, permeable paving was the most popular installation. This is really worth noting because of how expensive it is and how out of reach it can be for so many of our neighbors. And so we'll get to this more in the recommendations, but I think it's worth saying twice that we need better strategies so that everyone can access permeable hardscape. One of the questions we get most often when people just call the FYI phone is, I got to tear up my driveway. This is especially true since we're seeing cases of insurance companies threatening to pull policies over old, cracked, broken concrete. And folks being cited for having too much concrete. We support those citations. However, we get calls from people who say, I got cited and I can't afford to tear up the concrete. It's outside of this survey data illustrates something that we see in our everyday work as well. So that is something that I think everybody in our industry needs to take forward with us into the future is the desirability and the necessity of permeable hardscape. Something else that we knew, but sort of was codified by this last survey is that FYI served as a jumping off point for many participants after they participated. So this is a graph here. We asked this question for the first time this year, and I'm glad that we did, of additional green infrastructure that our participants added after they had participated with us. So sometimes years later, most people are adding native plants and shrubs. Some folks are adding trees. One person reported having added 13 trees to her property since participating in FYI, which is particularly special, and if you've got the room for it. But people are adding all kinds of things. So our participants did not see FYI participation as a one and done. They saw it as the start of a process. And indeed, many folks in our open-ended questions asked if there was more funding to do more work on their own properties. So knowing that this is true is important because we're starting to see the installation of residential green infrastructure as participation in a culture shift. And that is kind of the secret theme of this presentation. I want to refer back with this point, I'm going to jump back a little bit to the graph that we saw of folks joining these other organizations and participating in these other service projects after they participated in FYI. As much as a lot of them are doing it before, and of course we have a self-selecting audience, that participation is jumping afterwards. And finally, we know from this overwhelming evidence that the financial incentive offered by FYI remains crucial for people to take the first step to install green infrastructure. We had one participant even say, as much as I try to live a green lifestyle in all ways, I have to admit that the financial incentive is the only reason that we did this. It shows that people want this and that it is out of reach. We had the issue in the years immediately prior to sunsetting the incentive portion of our program that the incentive was fulfilling less and less of the burden of that cost because of the rising costs of labor and materials. And of course, the stagnant, if nothing else, cost of contributions of philanthropy. But people want this and they need an incentive. That being said, the Front Yard Initiative was always meant to be a model that the municipality or other larger entities could scale. We think we've built a really strong model that includes education at the front end, that includes technical support throughout, and that promises this incentive at the end. And so we'll get to that more in the recommendations. But we know that if some green infrastructure program is to be taken on at a higher level, this financial incentive must be a part of it. And lastly, the FYI model shows the necessity of front-end education, especially on the topic of maintenance and our effectiveness at providing it, because this is a graph of folks saying how much maintenance they have had to do on their installation compared to before the installation. And as we see, it jumps usually just a little bit, especially with our 2026 cohort. We saw that, especially with our previous cohorts, we saw it increase just a little. And 2026 said that it mostly stayed about the same. We saw comments from this question along the lines of course it's more maintenance. I think we had, of the 12 answers that were given, 3 said, of course it's more maintenance. I replaced concrete with plants. And 7 others used the words worth it, that the increased maintenance is worth it. We've seen in other circumstances that maintenance piece doesn't go so well. And we believe that it's because of the front end education that we do that allows for the participants to feel buy-in into their project, to feel a real sense of ownership of it, and to know that the maintenance is coming and not be surprised by it, and only sign up for what they can and are willing to do. So overwhelmingly, that has been the effect here, that if maintenance didn't stay the same, it increased or decreased by only a little bit, is the feedback that we're hearing here. And we believe what it is that people are installing things that they know will be a manageable level of maintenance because they've given it that thought. And so on to our recommendations. Firstly, we believe that there is research to be done on habitat creation through FYI projects. I just really wanted to show off this photo I took of an EO moth in my yard. I have a 2017 FYI project. However, back to the point, we would be happy to have researchers at all levels take on the challenge of figuring out how much habitat we've created and what the effect of that habitat has been. We know that we've removed over the course of 10 years about 93,000 square feet of impermeable surface. How much of that became habitat? How much of that habitat is strong? We're curious about questions like, how close is this habitat to each other? Where we know where the corridors are of our participants. Does this increase habitats? What sorts of organisms are we seeing? Is there an effect if trees are present or not present? So if anyone's interested in picking up these questions, we would be happy to partner. Next, as we discussed before, there is demand and need for more education about and access to permeable hardscape options. This is, again, the thing that we get questions about most often. We also know that it is the most expensive by far. Concrete removal is often the biggest barrier itself, the expense of concrete removal. But once you do that, affording the excavation, the gravel, in many cases, the pavers, is a real barrier. So how do we support and advocate for the incentivizing and the assistance, the financial assistance required to help people at all income levels all over the city have access to this technology that can not only protect but beautify their properties? I also just want to point out, this is a photo that I love because it shows us another unexpected benefit of green infrastructure. That beautiful rain barrel, courtesy, well, not courtesy of, but thanks to Greenlight New Orleans, now Rain or Shine, is blocking a utility box because the homeowner wanted to protect it from her teenager so that he couldn't hit it with the car. So we see in all kinds of ways people really, really integrating green infrastructure into their lives and making it their own. And we want people to be able to continue to do that. So we, as the folks who really care about this, need to be talking about hardscape and how we can help people access permeable hardscape. And 3, we believe that part of the way that this can happen is that the city must aid the culture shift our participants are trying to make by including green infrastructure in all new decisions. This is doable. We know it's doable because this picture here is Gretna City Hall. And so we know that these answers are locally achievable and obviously locally relevant. When I refer to the culture shift, our participants, it's worth noting, told us that what they want to see from us is more advocacy for this green infrastructure in this space. So in our last presentation, what we did was we discussed our key findings and how that was going to inform our work. The making of recommendations in this public sphere is how these key findings have informed our work. The key finding that people want us to be more active in the advocacy sphere, that is our work now. And so we point this out to say that that people want green infrastructure included in decisions. They want garden spaces, green spaces, trees included in decisions as a default. And so this is one of our key recommendations here, is that we need this to be happening at the city level. And finally, stakeholders must advocate for an incentive program at the municipal level. Many other cities have this. We need it here. That incentive program must learn from the success of the FYI model and invest in the education and full engagement of their participants at every step of the process in order to create long-term ownership of these installations. We believe that part of the way that this can happen is through the funding of a stormwater fee. And we would love to see that stormwater fee. We believe that the stormwater fee must include incentive funding for people to install green infrastructure, as well as credits for people who have already put in that investment to decrease impermeable surface on their own properties. And when we say that, when we talk about incentive dollars, we want education dollars included in that too, because we know that it's only with this front end education and this full buy-in that the maintenance happens that makes the installation last. And folks, I believe that that is all. You can read the full report on our website. And I want to end quickly by telling you about a couple other really fun events that we've got coming up next week. And again, thank you for joining us. On Friday, this coming Friday, we are hosting a happy hour at 7-3 Distilling called Drinks with Cool People Who Know Things. And what we're doing is we're highlighting all of the incredible knowledge within our sector and trying to give the general public access to that knowledge by inviting really cool people like yourselves to come and join us for really great cocktails and wear a little badge that says "Ask Me About" with your topic of choice. Dana is going to put a link to this in the chat so that you can register. You can come and fill out something that says "Ask Me About," and hopefully people will come ask you about it. Something that you're interested in sharing about your organization, your expertise. Or just something that you care deeply about. Also worth noting, 7-3 is donating 10% of the proceeds to the Urban Conservancy. And then next week, on the 14th, the evening of the 14th at Le Petit Rouge, Stay Local is hosting a City Shuffle game night. This is a game that was developed by Dirty Coast, and the event is in partnership with Dirty Coast. Everybody takes home a gift from Dirty Coast. Come play in teams of 4. And then hopefully be elevated to the winner's circle to win our incredibly cool traveling Stay Local trophy. And with that, I'll ask for questions and comments. Maddie, first, is there anything in the chat?
There are 3 amazing links in the chat currently.
I would like to actually make a comment if I can. And that's kind of overall. Thanks, Emily, for this super excellent summary of the report. And the link is there. It's downloadable from our website, or you can just read it online. But I think another thing that this just points to in general is the need for data. For us collectively to continue to collect data of this sort of what the change is looking like over time, now that we have the luxury of having conducted FYI for 10 plus years. Our pilot project was in 2015. We started developing the model in 2013, 2014 before we rolled it out. But we have a nice longitudinal look now. And I think it's important for us to continue as we do the work. And I'm talking to everybody on here because I know a lot of you are involved in some way or another in the green sector, that we continue to really prioritize the data collection so we can tell the story when the work is in place, and also so that we can continue to monitor it. I think, I don't know if you mentioned, Emily, at the beginning, but like part of what the data we collected, it was on everything from like how much the projects cost, who the green sector, if it was DIY, or if there were contractors, and if so, which contractors. We collected information on how many square feet of paving removed, plants that were planted, et cetera, et cetera. So through that, we know that we were collectively through those 168 projects that we provided financial incentive for. We were collectively, those projects that some range from very small, most were very small, the size of a yard or a part of a yard, to collectively that was keeping 4 million gallons of stormwater conservatively per year out of the storm systems and catch basins and streets. It was not over 90,000 square feet of paving removed, which meant, all of those wonderful things, the 13 trees plus everything else was going in to replace that. So those are the sorts of, and I'm blanking on the number. I think I'm trying to think of one other metric, but yeah, that, and that's just with the
dollars contributed to the green sector, dollars spent within the green.
That's a very conservative number, because we're just looking directly like how much did you pay the contractor for materials, but it was over $1 million with those 168. So the knockoff benefits are not included in that number, but yeah, so just collecting the data, I would just put that out to everybody, is let's keep doing that and doing that well. And I don't know that anybody from groundwork is on here, but maybe Cheryl, if you got, I'm WaterWise is involved in that as well as we are, but this idea of sort of trusting one another so that we can create these repositories of collective impact within like municipal wide places. Groundwork has created a citywide map showing all different sorts of interventions with several partners, including us and WaterWise. So I think thinking along those lines is important as well.
I totally agree. And I understand you all are going to make this video recording available to us. So I will be sharing that with the collective, the WaterWise Collective. But me being who I am, I'm very interested in the advocacy part of moving really the urban land. I'm drawing a blank. I said I wasn't going to say anything. I was on for information and seeing how we can improve the work that we're doing and move it forward. But I am very interested in the advocacy part, because people are uninformed. They don't know as much as they need to know to help us reduce flooding in the city, not just in our neighborhoods, but citywide. And so I would like to be a part of that initiative, although WaterWise is on the same page with that also. We understand that there's a House Bill 1243 that the state well, the governor is signing into place, where Sewage and Water Board is going to take over. And so the stormwater fee keeps coming up in our conversations, and how does that be distributed fairly amongst all property owners? And so, whatever Greater Treme can do along with WaterWise, that's what we're looking at. But I think we're on the same page as far as the incentives for the work that we are doing to be linked or associated with whatever. Hopefully we don't have to have a stormwater fee, but in the event that they do impose this on us, that it be distributed fairly amongst the homeowners. So yes. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Cheryl. Appreciate that.
Yes, very much. Anyone else? Any other questions or thoughts? Or dare I say disagreements? All right. Well, thank you all so very much for attending. And again, you can read the full report on our website. And if you come up with any questions later, we're always here. Give us a call, shoot us an email. We'd be thrilled to hear from any of you.